We really like to think of ourselves as entirely rational beings, right? Especially when it comes to our money. We tell ourselves we weigh the pros and cons, we run the math, and we just make the logical choice. But a fascinating blend of behavioral economics and neuroscience tells a completely different story. So let's dive right into this explainer on the brain's hidden warning system. We're going to unpack exactly what is happening inside your head when you make those seemingly irrational financial decisions.
To get us started, picture this. Imagine an economist who bought a really nice bottle of Bordeaux wine years ago for just $10. Today, that exact same bottle has appreciated so much it would easily fetch $200 at auction. Now, our economist occasionally drinks this wine, but here is the catch. He utterly refuses to sell his bottle for $200, and yet he would absolutely never go out and buy a brand new bottle of that same wine for $200. So, why the contradiction? Mathematically, the value of the wine is exactly the same either way. But as you'll see, human behavior isn't just about math.
And that brings us to our first core concept, the endowment effect.
To really understand this, let's look at a classic, kind of brilliant experiment conducted with undergrad economics students at Cornell University. The researchers took a bunch of standard university coffee mugs, the kind that sold for $6 at the campus bookstore, and just randomly handed them out to half the students in the room. These students became the sellers. The other half of the room got absolutely nothing. They were the buyers. Then, they essentially opened up a market and told them to trade. Keep in mind, who got a mug was pure luck. And if you know anything about college students, you know they love free stuff. But what happened next actually shocked the researchers.
The gap in how these groups valued the exact same object was wild. The sellers, who had owned the mug for literally mere minutes, demanded a median price of over $7 to part with it. Meanwhile, the buyers, along with a third group called choosers, who could just pick between getting a mug or taking cash, valued that exact same mug at around $3. Think about that. Simply being endowed with the mug, just holding it in their hands, more than doubled its value to the owner. It turns out, we don't just value things based on how useful they are, we value them simply because they're ours.
And this ties right into another really interesting quirk called the status quo bias. Basically, this is our deep-seated preference for keeping things exactly the way they are. And this wasn't just proven with coffee mugs. It was accidentally tested on a massive real-world scale by New Jersey and Pennsylvania when it came to car insurance. Both states passed laws offering drivers a choice: a cheaper policy that restricted the right to sue, or a more expensive policy that kept full rights to sue.
Literally, the only difference between the two states was the default option. In New Jersey, the cheaper policy was the default, and you had to actually pay extra to opt out, while a staggering 83% of drivers just stayed with it. But in Pennsylvania, the expensive policy was the default, and you had to take action to get the cheaper plan. Over there, only 53% of drivers opted out for the cheaper one. The vast majority of people simply stuck with whatever box was already checked for them. We just have this incredible inertia when it comes to making changes.
Which leads us to part 2 of our explainer: why we hate losing.
So the crucial takeaway here is that whether it's parting with a cheap coffee mug or changing a default car insurance policy, we have a profound psychological preference for keeping things exactly as they are. But what's really driving this? Why is it so hard to just let go? Well, all of this points to one overarching theory developed by behavioral economists called loss aversion. It's essentially an asymmetry of value. Put simply, the pain of giving something up is vastly greater than the pleasure of acquiring it. Changes that make things worse, meaning losses, just loom so much larger in our minds than improvements or gains.
To put a number on it, studies consistently show that losses loom about 1.5 to 2 times as large as equivalent gains. So if you lose $100 today, it hurts you about twice as much as finding $100 would make you happy. And this specific ratio makes us systematically avoid risks, even when we might earn a substantially larger reward. It explains the wine collector, it explains the coffee mugs, and it perfectly explains the insurance default. But, figuring out what we do is only half the puzzle.
The real question is, why in the world are we wired this way? We know the math. We know it doesn't make logical sense to value a mug at $7 just because we touched it. So what physical part of our brain is actually forcing us to make these mathematically irrational choices? Is there an actual biological mechanism behind loss aversion?
Let's get into it in Section 3, the brain's warning system.
This is where the world of behavioral economics collides with cutting-edge neuroscience to solve the mystery. Researchers at Caltech and University College London ran tests on 2 women, known in the study as SM and AP. Both suffer from Urbach weed disease. It's an extremely rare genetic condition that effectively destroyed their amygdala. For those who might need a quick refresher, the amygdala is that little almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, heavily linked to processing fear, threat, and intense emotional reactions. Now, aside from lacking this very specific fear response, both of these women have completely normal intelligence and cognitive function.
By observing how these two patients handled financial risk compared to healthy individuals, the researchers made a groundbreaking discovery, one that kind of completely rewrites our understanding of loss aversion. As they bluntly put it in their study, amygdala damage eliminates monetary loss aversion. Literally, without a functioning amygdala, the fear of losing money just vanishes.
Here's the setup for how they proved it. They ran an experiment where the women, alongside perfectly healthy control groups, were given a real $50 cash endowment right at the start. Then they were asked to accept or reject a series of risky coin flips. This wasn't some hypothetical survey. Real money was on the line based on a simple 50-50 probability.
The gambles they were offered had a symmetrical range of outcomes. So on any given coin flip, they could potentially win anywhere from $20 to $50, but they could also lose anywhere from $20 to $50. Now, because of that typical 1.5 to 2 times loss aversion ratio we talked about earlier, most normal people will completely reject a coin flip where they could lose $20, unless they stand to win at least 30 or 40. The potential pain of the loss just completely outweighs the potential joy of the gain.
And when the results came in, that is exactly what the healthy controls did. They behaved normally, avoiding the gambles where they might lose money even if the math was actually in their favor. But SM and AP, they showed a dramatically higher willingness to take the bets. Because they lacked the fear center of the brain, they didn't feel that emotional sting of a potential loss. They just looked at the raw math.
The researchers actually calculated their exact loss aversion ratio, which math folks call lambda. Remember, normal healthy controls scored around 1.5 to 1.7, but AP scored a 1.06. That means she was essentially completely loss neutral. A dollar lost was exactly equal to a dollar gained for her. Even more incredibly, SM scored a 0.76, meaning she was actually slightly loss-seeking. Without the amygdala, the fundamental laws of behavioral economics essentially collapsed.
Now you might be wondering, does amygdala damage just make you a completely reckless risk-taker? Are they just blindly gambling? The answer is no, and honestly, this is what makes the studies so fascinating. SM and AP still preferred bigger gains. They disliked high variance and unpredictability just like anyone else. And when they were offered gambles that only involved gains, where no losses were even possible, they showed completely normal caution. They weren't reckless at all. Their basic logic and preference for reward were perfectly intact. Literally, the only thing missing was that disproportionate dread of losing.
Wrapping things up in Section 4, Life Without Loss Aversion.
This perfectly isolates the function of the amygdala in our daily economic lives. It shows us unequivocally that loss aversion isn't some abstract mathematical error we make. It's a hardwired physical response generated by our brain's threat detection center. The study concludes that the amygdala acts as a biological cautionary brake. Deep in our evolutionary past, it kept us alive by making us hypervigilant to threats and potential losses in the wild. Today, it still generates a signal of prospective loss that stops us from acting, even when we're just looking at an investment portfolio where the math is entirely in our favor. It hits the emergency brakes before our logical brain can even process the numbers.
So as we finish up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to really reflect on. The next time you find yourself holding on to a losing stock, just hoping it bounces back, or refusing to sell a prized possession for its true market value, or sticking with the default insurance policy just because it's easier, ask yourself, who is really making that decision? Is it your logic, or is it your amygdala pulling the emergency brake? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.